Hey there guys, and welcome to Tech Engineered. Today we're going to be doing a review of the iPhone 7 Plus, so let's get started. So the iPhone 7 Plus is the latest revision of the iPhone, and it is also the Plus edition. I guess it's not exactly the latest revision of the iPhone since it is a Plus. The Plus is a bigger phone with some different things about it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in this video. It was released on September 16th, 2016, so we are kind of late to it, and they will be releasing new iPhones towards the end of this summer, kind of beginning of fall actually. But I did upgrade my phone and I got this phone, so I wanted to make a review on this phone because many of you, when the new iPhones come out, are going to be thinking about getting last year's model because they will be a lot cheaper, and they already are cheaper. That's one of the reasons why I went ahead and did my upgrade, because the phone was cheaper and I needed a new phone. My phone was failing me, I was having SIM card issues and stuff like that, so I just went ahead and did my upgrade. So now we're going to be doing a review of my new phone. To start off, let's talk about kind of the internal specs of this phone. It does have a A10 Fusion processor from Apple, and basically the way that this processor works is it is a quad-core processor, but the cores are not equal. Two of them are high-performance cores that are just like no holds barred, just crank things out, and two of them are low-performance cores that will not use up a whole lot of battery life and can do a lot of your basic tasks and be super power efficient at it. And that's kind of where this phone gets a lot of its battery life from, not really having a larger battery, but just from having the low perf cores to kind of aid in your everyday tasks while still having high performance cores to give the phone a little bit of extra oomph whenever you're needing to do something that's a little bit more compute heavy. This phone does have 3 gigs of RAM in it, and that is one of the differences between the Plus and the regular model of the iPhone 7. The Plus has 3 gigs and the standard has 2 gigs, so that's one of the reasons why I did want to go with the Plus, is for that extra RAM. All of the iPhone 7s have a base capacity of 32 gigs, and then they go to 128 as the middle ground and 256 as the top of the line capacity. One thing to remember with the Apple memory controller is if you have less capacity, it's not going to be able to read that solid state memory as fast. I'm sure you can look up videos on how that works. I don't really want to explain it in this video. I've done my research into it, but I might make an entire video on it because it is kind of complicated. But basically that's what you need to know, is that with Apple's memory controller there can be up to an 8 times difference in read and write speeds depending on the capacity of the phone, even though it's the same memory controller. With the way that the memory is stacked, having a larger capacity helps it read and write faster. The battery is a 2900 milliamp hour battery, and with the A10 Fusion processor I can survive an entire day without dropping below 80% on the battery if I'm using it pretty lightly. If I'm doing a lot of things with it, I might drop down to 60, but I just take my phone off the charger when I wake up and put it back on the charger when I go to bed, and yeah, at most I'll drop down to 60. I've never seen my phone below 60% battery unless I just forgot to charge it that night, so I can easily get 2 days of battery life out of the phone. So on the topic of the battery and charging, I did mention that it charges off a standard lightning connector, but the cable provided does feel pretty cheap, and Apple generally does that. They have really thin cables that don't feel like they're quite the right gauge, even though they are. A lot of other companies will have thicker cables with more insulation, but Apple's insulation is usually pretty thin on their cables, and it just feels like where the connectors join with the cable, it just doesn't feel quite right, and that's usually where Apple's cables fail, so I don't know why they haven't fixed this yet, but the cable feels the same as any other Apple cable, so I'm sure it will fail in the same ways as a normal Apple cable, so you might want to go ahead and invest in a new, stronger, sturdier cable that might be a braided cable or something like that. But it is a standard lightning connector to USB. Now the wall adapter is pretty nice, like Apple wall adapters usually are. Those are usually pretty high quality, although the provided cable in the wall adapter, for some reason the connectors, the USB connector, meshes in there really well and is actually hard to pull out and hard to put in. I don't know if that's just a problem with mine, but it's actually kind of scary because it's usually isn't like that. Usually USB cables have the same amount of tension pulling in and out as any other USB cable, but for some reason this one's different. I don't know if that's by design or not, but it's kind of scary because you're like, oh, am I going to rip the connectors out of the USB cable? Am I hooked on something? I don't know. So yeah, that's just something that I noticed. I'm not sure if it's specific to me or not, but yeah, that's something that I noticed with my iPhone 7 Plus kit. Now that I've talked about internal specs, let's talk about the inputs and outputs, and the user interface. The phone has the basic iPhone lineup of input, output, and user interface. It has a ringer switch, it has the volume rockers, has a power button, all of which are very clicky and tactile and are very hard to mispress, but pretty easy to press. Apple has always done well with their volume rockers and power buttons and their switches and stuff, and they are always great, and they are on this phone. It charges via your standard lightning connector, just like most Apple phones have been for the past couple of years, and it also does not have a headphone port. Now, I know this is a major issue for a lot of people, and it really has kind of been an issue for me, but it isn't that bad of an issue because it comes with an adapter for the lightning port to turn it into a headphone jack, and I just carry that in my wallet with me. With the killer battery life on this phone, it's not like you're going to run into the problem of, oh, I need to charge my phone and I need to listen to music. Generally, you're not going to encounter that problem because if you charge your phone when you're not using your phone, you'll have enough battery life. You're not going to be using your phone enough that you're going to run out of battery life and also need to listen to music, unless you just charge your phone like once every 3 days. Then you might encounter that situation, but most people charge their phone every day, and this phone will last you for the entire day, so there's no reason that should be a problem, and it hasn't been a problem for me. So I find that not having the headphone jack isn't that big of a problem, and it actually helps with the waterproofness of the phone, so that kind of is a plus side there, and it's not that big of a deal, honestly, for me. For other people it is, but I'm fine with just carrying the little dongle around to adapt my headphones, or just using the headphones that come with the phone, which are just standard Apple EarPods that connect via lightning connector. The speakers on this phone do sound great. With the 7s, this is the first lineup of phones that have stereo speakers. It utilizes the speaker that you would normally listen to in your ear when you're on the phone as another speaker along with the speaker on the bottom of the phone, and it uses those to make stereo sound. Now, it is kind of lopsided because you can tell the speaker on the bottom of the phone has a little bit more bass, but if you're just showing somebody a video or something like that, you don't need perfect stereo sound. It sounds good enough, it sounds really good, and it's really loud. So these are by far some of the best speakers I've heard on a phone besides like HTC's phones. Those generally have amazing speakers on them, but for an iPhone, definitely the best speakers so far that they have ever put on a phone. Let's talk about the screen for a little bit. The screen is a 5.7-inch 1080p Retina display, and it looks beautiful. The 1080p is fine. It's a small display. You don't need 4K on a phone. I don't see why that's the latest hype, is like 2K and 4K Ultra HD on phones. You can't hardly tell. With 1080p on a small screen, the pixel density is already so high that you can't hardly see the pixels. So it's fine having 1080p, and I see a lot of people complaining about that. Oh, Apple's still using a 1080p display. It's fine. Like, the pixel density is high enough. We don't need to worry about that. Now, the iPhone 7 does not have a 1080p display. It is some other weird definition that's kind of in between 1080p and 720p. So it is going to be a lower definition display. You have to get the Plus to get the full 1080p Retina display. The touchscreen isn't the best touchscreen. It's pretty responsive, but I've seen Android phones that have better displays, and it's a pretty good display, I would say. By far one of the best, but it is not the best display when you talk about responsiveness. Pulling up the menus and stuff, sometimes you gotta try it again, but that's just generally something that you have issues with on most phones, and it's only really the best screens that kind of shine in that regard whenever you're having to pull down menus and stuff. That's always kind of hard to implement on a phone, and it's kind of hard to get a screen that will effectively negate false touches and accept true touches when it comes to those drop-down screens. So they've done a pretty good job there, but yeah, they're still not the best when it comes to the screen responsiveness. Let's talk about the operating system for a little bit. The operating system is very polished. It is iOS, so iOS is a very polished operating system that is easy to use and very user-friendly, and if you've had any experience with Apple phones, you'll be able to use it right away, and it's going to be basically the same thing. And I'm a big fan of iOS, actually, because it is very user-friendly. I don't like that it's not very customizable. I love Android because you feel so free. You can do whatever you want on Android. You can customize it. There are tons of settings. The settings menu is so much bigger. But with iOS, it is very user-friendly, so it is kind of like a breath of fresh air after being on Android for a while like I was. Getting into an iPhone again was kind of like, oh, this is all a lot easier. I can find things easier. But still, yeah, you won't get the same customizability as you do on Android, and the App Store is going to be more limited than on Android because Apple does screen the App Store. Now let's talk about the camera. The camera is a 12-megapixel dual sensor camera on the Plus. It has a wide angle and a 2x telephoto lens. On the standard iPhone 7, it only has the 12-megapixel wide-angle lens, and the phone can zoom all the way up to 10 times zoom with digital zoom, but it can go to 2 times optical zoom using that telephoto lens, and it can go anywhere between 1 and 2 times by blending the 2 lenses together, and that technology actually works really well, and it's pretty seamless. If you pay attention to the exposure, you can see that it changes exposure a little bit just because the lenses are slightly different lenses, since one's telephoto and one's wide angle, so the exposure settings are a little bit different, but it meshes it out, and you can only see that as you're changing it. You can see the exposure change in some areas where it's meshing in the telephoto lens, but that technology does really work well on the iPhone 7 Plus. It does shoot up to 4K video at 30 frames per second, or it can shoot 1080p at 60, 1080p at 30, or like basically anything down below. You can change that in these settings on the phone. But yeah, maximum is 4K at 30 frames per second. It of course has the slow-mo mode where it can shoot at like 120 frames per second at 1080p or 240 at 720p. I'd recommend doing the 240 at 720p because that slow-mo just looks better because it's higher frames per second. That is a very nice feature to be able to shoot at that high of a frame rate to get some cool slow-mo shots, and it's nice to have that just in your pocket, and really no other phone has that feature. Well, a lot of phones will have a slow-mo feature, but not one that works as well as Apple's. Apple's does work very well. It also has a time-lapse feature where it shoots a bunch of pictures for an amount of time and then splices them together into a video file that is a time-lapse. And that's kind of nice to see on the phone. I've used it several times and it works pretty well. And yeah, time-lapse is just another nice camera feature. The new mode that they added to the iPhone 7 Plus is the portrait mode, where it adds a depth of field effect to a portrait picture. And this works pretty well. Generally you need quite a bit of lighting, and also it zooms in quite a bit, so you need to move yourself away from your subject whenever you're taking the portrait. But it does work pretty well, and I'll show a test image right here of portrait mode. It does look pretty cool and simulates a nice depth of field, much like a DSLR camera would. So now let's move on to comparing some of the iPhone 7 Plus's pictures to pictures taken on a DSLR, because they're adding a lot of features to this phone that are more DSLR level, so I feel like we should try and actually compare them to what they're trying to compete with, adding depth of field effects and stuff like that. They're trying to compete with the DSLR audience. So I went out and took a bunch of like nature photography pictures and also a picture of my cat with my T5i from Canon, and also with the iPhone 7. I had the iPhone 7 set to auto, and then I did manual settings on the T5i because that's what I normally do. So here is our photo comparison. So why did I choose to go with the iPhone 7 Plus over the standard iPhone 7? It was mainly for 3 reasons. I liked the better camera, more RAM, and the bigger screen size. I don't talk on the phone that much, so the bigger screen size really helps when I'm messaging or just surfing the web or something like that, and the phone is still small enough that it fits in my pocket. So it's a way to just kind of get a little bit more screen real estate with me on the go. And then the more RAM is definitely good, just because you can never have too much RAM. I am a RAM hog no matter what device I'm on, because I generally use Chrome and I use a bunch of apps at the same time and stuff going in between them, so I just need a lot of RAM generally, so the extra RAM is definitely a good feature for me. And as a hobbyist photographer and videographer, having a nice camera in my pocket is a good plus side too, and the iPhone 7 Plus camera is definitely better than the iPhone 7's camera. So yeah, that is why I went with the iPhone 7 Plus. So, in conclusion, it is a beautiful phone with decent internal specs, a polished OS, and a great camera. It is not perfect by any means, but at the time of this video coming out, it is the best phone on the market. There are Android phones that compete with it, but as of right now, at this point in the phone market, I think that the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus are the best phones out there. I feel like the other phones that are out there competing with them are not quite up to par, and I feel like last generation's phones, definitely Android ruled that market, but now in this market, Apple is again the king. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and maybe it helped you learn some things about the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus to where you're gonna think, hey, maybe I might get it. Or maybe you're like, I don't wanna get it at all, I need a headphone jack. Either way, if you did find this video informational and enjoyed it, go ahead and leave a like on it. If you like the content on this channel in general, go ahead and subscribe. If you have advice for future content that I can make, leave that in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.